Well, we have to leave the south side and head up into Oakland, go to the Cathedral of Learning, up to the Peterson Event Center, maybe take a ride down to Chapel Hill. We've got a lot of things we've got to talk about on today's Morning Pit that are not about training camp. I want to get back to the training camp conversation, but there's just too many other things going on. So we're going to cover them all today with 5 thoughts on Heather Lyke, the Ohio State job, Pitt's new chancellor, the ACC, expansion. I think that's about it. And that should give us plenty to talk about in the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Thursday here on the Morning Pit, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Of course, you should know that by now. I assume that's why you're tuning in. You should know the website by now as well, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. That might be the place where you're watching this video. It might be the place where you link to this video, or maybe you found it on Twitter, again, where the Twitter handle is Panther-Lair. So you should be well familiar with Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to talk with other Pitt fans all day, every day. Pitt fans are talking on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com about what's going on in the world of Pitt sports, and there is a lot going on in the world of Pitt sports. Before we get into that, you need to make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Those are the 2 things I ask you to do, or 3 things, I guess, that I ask you to do every day. Go check out Panther-Lair.com, like this video, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You don't want to miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. And so the way to make sure you're on top of all of it is to subscribe to the channel. Subscribe button's right down there. That makes it nice and easy for you. Just click it, and then you are all set. All right. So there's a lot going on. And there's a lot going on outside of stuff that's happening on the field. And while we'll spend a lot of time this month talking about Phil Dracovic, yesterday I talked about 4 guys who were standing out, 2 on each side of the ball. Incidentally, talked a lot about Bengali Kamara yesterday. And in the afternoon or late morning or whatever it was, Pitt released a video of Kamara making an interception on a tip drill in practice. So shout out to me. That train is leaving the station. You better get on board. I won't make the choo-choo sound again, but, well, I might. I can't promise that I won't make it again, but I might. So, I mean, we talked a lot about that yesterday, and we'll have lots of training camp conversation tomorrow and next week and the week after that, heading into the season. But right now, there's a lot going on that's outside of what's happening in the South Side. There's a lot going on that doesn't have anything to do with Phil Dracovic or Bub Means or Frank Signetti or Bengali Kamara. There's a lot going on that doesn't have to do with any of that. And a new layer was added yesterday when Gene Smith announced that he was retiring as Ohio State's athletic director, effective next year. I forget, sometime in 2024. And that's relevant because what we've always said, what we've always been told, what we've always believed is that when it comes to Pitt director of athletics, Heather Lyke, there's one job that you had to keep an eye out for. Michigan would always be sort of a threat there. She went to Michigan. But where she really cut her teeth as an administrator, where she really learned the business of big college athletics, is when she spent 15 years in the athletic department at Ohio State, working under Gene Smith and becoming part of the Buckeyes. And it's, for a Michigan person to spend that kind of time at Ohio State, she sort of created allegiances on both sides of the aisle there. But when other jobs would come open, when this athletic director position was open or that athletic director position was open, there's success in Pitt's athletic department. And so Heather Lyke would be mentioned. And that was natural. But what we always felt, what we always were told, what we always believed was that the one job to watch out for, the one job to be concerned about with Heather Lyke, the one job that she could potentially leave for is Ohio State. I think everybody has their dream job. Everybody has that job they would leave their current position for, no matter what their current position is. And it seems like for Heather Lyke, again, from everything we've been told, the very short list of jobs she would leave Pitt for, one of them is Ohio State, and it's probably at the top of the list. I don't think there's any, and it was inevitable. I mean, as soon as the Gene Smith announcement was made yesterday, her name started getting talked about. She's not the only one. There's a couple other obvious candidates who've been talked about as well. And sometimes, with the obvious candidate, the funny thing happens that it's not the obvious candidate. Oh, of course it would be this guy. Of course it would be this lady. And it ends up not being that. But it's inevitable that Heather Lyke will be mentioned for her time at Ohio State, for the success that Pitt has had recently in the athletic department. I mean, the entire department seems to be moving at a pretty high level right now. Jeff Capel figured out how to use the transfer portal. Kenny Pickett had a Heisman Trophy season, a Heisman finalist season. Dan Fisher keeps it rolling. Both soccer programs are on the rise. And she even hired Randy Waldrum, the women's soccer coach. So she gets credit for that. And then in addition to the facilities projects and the ongoing facilities updates and upgrades and the Victory Heights project, and you see the accolades. You see the accolades, month after month, particularly in the last 2 years since the ACC year and a half since the ACC championship, and then the success that basketball had this past season. And you start seeing Heather Lyke being talked about as one of the top athletic directors in the country. And so when you combine that, sort of a feel of a rising star, even though she's on her second major college job, after being the AD at Eastern Michigan before coming to Pitt, still something of a rising star, someone who's emerging as maybe one of the better athletic directors in the country, and then having those direct ties to Ohio State. Well, you don't have to be, even the most aggregating of content aggregators out there can figure out how to put her name on a list. It's just sort of inevitable. It's like back when Pitt was going through all those coaching changes in the early 2000s that, just you had your regular cast of characters. Of course, you're going to list Tom Bradley. Of course, you're going to list Paul Rose. Of course, you're going to list, Terrell Austin. I mean, it's automatic. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, but it is automatic and reflexive that Heather Lyke is getting mentioned. You know who else? Patrick Chung, the athletic director at Washington State, who also spent like 15 years at Ohio State. You know who else? Martin Jarman, the athletic director at UCLA, who was at Ohio State for a long time. These are three sitting Power 5 athletic directors who have extensive ties to Ohio State, and their names are getting mentioned. And it's inevitable and it's automatic. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't be considered. I'm sure that a search firm or someone affiliated with Ohio State will be in contact with all three of those names I just mentioned, as well as a host of others. There's a couple things to keep in mind here, though, as we move forward. Now that we're all involved in the Ohio State athletic director search, a couple things to keep in mind as we move forward with it. One, Ohio State doesn't have a president. All right, Ohio State's president announced, I think at the end of November, that she was resigning. And her final move was like this spring. She gave one final speech, I think at graduation or something like that. And so she's out, and they need a new president, and they haven't moved along. I don't know if they've made progress or not, but they haven't hired anyone yet. You would have to think hiring the new president comes before hiring the new athletic director. So while Gene Smith gave a year notice on his retirement, they do need to get that. I would think Ohio State needs to fill that president position before they hire an athletic director. Probably before, they could go down the road of vetting candidates, gauging interest from candidates, reaching out to those three names that I just mentioned, say, hey, through back channels, would you be interested if, as we move, once the president comes in, should we put you on the list of candidates who would be interested in this position? And I'd be shocked if all three of them didn't say yes. I'm sure that if Heather Lyke is asked, would you be interested in the Ohio State job? She would say, yes, I would. And there's no shame in that. Again, everyone has a dream job that they would leave their current position for. Everyone has that short list of jobs that they would go for. And I think Ohio State's on that list for Heather Lyke. I think if Ohio State called Heather Lyke tonight and said, will you take this job? We are offering you the job. I think she would take it. That's just my own, somewhat based on what I've been told, somewhat based on just my understanding of the situation. I think it's a long ways away from Ohio State deciding if they want to make such an offer to Heather Lyke. The other thing, like I say, in addition to needing to hire a university president first, is that there's a lot of ways Ohio State can attack this. It's been suggested to me a couple of times that they may or may not look for someone with a background in athletics, that they may lean more toward a business side of finding someone who maybe is not someone who didn't necessarily come up in athletic departments and maybe has cut their teeth in different venues or different fields that could have connections to athletics. Because I mean, we've seen college athletics straying from the sports aren't always the chief concern. There is a business side to it as well. And so all of these people we're talking about, whether it's the Washington State AD, the UCLA AD, or Heather Lyke, maybe they go in a different direction altogether. I think Ohio State will vet all of those candidates and more. Oh, and that's the third thing, right? Number one, Ohio State needs a president first. Two, Ohio State could go in a completely non-athletics direction. And three, whatever direction they decide to go, they're going to have no shortage of candidates. And while Heather Lyke has, presided over the Pitt athletic department during a period of pretty considerable success, there's some other athletic directors around the country who've had success too, who would be interested in that job. I don't think they're going to have to dig too deep to find good candidates for the Ohio State athletic director position. And so those three things I think are worth keeping in mind as we move forward. Ultimately, I think if they say, we're offering you the job, I think she would take it. But the question is, will they say, we are offering you the job? So that's one thing, is the Ohio State athletic director situation. The other thing that, as you pull back and take a bigger picture view of the whole situation, of where Pitt's at, where the ACC is, where Pitt is in the ACC, where the ACC is in all of college football, it feels to me like this is not the time right now to be in a position of leadership transition. No matter how good a person you hire, no matter how good or bad the person is that you lose, it's not a good time to be in a transition period. And while Pitt is not right now in a period of transition with its athletic director, the athletic department still has stable leadership, right? There's nothing that's changed there, and probably won't for a little while, depending on what Ohio State chooses to do. They are changing chancellors. Bleh. I say transfer so much, somehow it ended up being chancellor turned into transfer. But they have changed chancellors. Patrick Gallagher is gone. Joan Gable is in from University of Minnesota. And I hear a lot of good things about Joan Gable and her commitment to athletics and her appreciation for athletics and her savviness at handling athletics. I've heard a lot of good things from people in a few different areas. We need to see it in action. We need to seeing is believing, that kind of thing. I haven't heard anything to say that she's not a supporter of athletics. I am one that thinks, you have to show it rather than just talk about it. But it is a challenging spot when you're in this period of transition. Ultimately, things like when it comes to the conference membership, conference expansion, conference realignment, a lot of those things happen above the head of the athletic department and above the head of the athletic director. So while I'm talking about it, it wouldn't be ideal to be in a period of transition with the director of athletics. A lot of it is happening above their head. The move to the ACC, from everything I've been told, was far more Mark Nordenberg than it was Steve Peterson. Everybody's involved. Everybody has a part to play, but it was ultimately led by the university chancellor. And so it's the chancellors and the presidents. And when you hear about these calls, the Pac-12 has a call today to discuss this media deal, and the Big 12 has a call today to discuss whether to invite this school or that school, it's almost exclusively what you see is the Pac-12 presidents are meeting. The Big 12 presidents are meeting or calling. There was something with the ACC, I think, where there were two different calls. There was an AD's call and a president's and chancellor's call. Ultimately, the ones who are making these decisions, not without input from their athletic directors, But the ones who are making these decisions, who are making these moves, are the presidents and chancellors. And I would be in no position to suggest that Joan Gable is unqualified to be part of that, but it's challenging when you just arrived. I think Patrick Gallagher was around for a while. He had the relationships. He had, respect of the rest of the conference. He knew people in the league. He had been in those meetings for the past however many years that he was at Pitt. Now you're bringing someone new into it. And she may have pre-existing relationships or, she may know some of the people in the ACC. I'm sure. I mean, it's a big industry, but it's also a small industry. I think you make connections and that kind of thing. But you're still sort of new at the table. And you're representing Pitt's interests at the table, but you are still a new face at the table. And so the ACC is in a very challenging position right now. I actually thought we might talk about some of the ACC's challenges, but we might have to do that on another podcast, which will be fine because things keep changing. So it's not hard to find new things to talk about with that. But as the ACC moves forward, and I think at some point this conference is going to have to get aggressive. Someone needs to be representing Pitt's interests. And that someone is going to be Joan Gable, University Chancellor. She needs to be representing Pitt's interests, and I'm sure she will to the best of her abilities, but she's also going to be a new face. It's not an ideal time to be in a transition, a leadership transition. And I guess to some extent, while everything I said is true that this happens above the level of the director of athletics, it's better to have only one leadership transition than two. To move forward at this particular point in time, let's say 3 months from now, Ohio State calls and says, Heather Lyke, we want you to be our next director of athletics. Or I guess if Ohio State calls and says, Heather Lyke, we want you to be our next athletic director. And she says, I will if you change the title to director of athletics. And she goes, now you're in sort of a transition with both your chancellor and your athletic director, even though the chancellor have been around for a few months. And I think that's tricky. The politics that come into this and representing Pitt's best interests and knowing how to push and pull with the various, elements in the ACC, it feels like Pitt's going into it blind if you have transitioned in both of those positions of the chancellor, the university leadership, and the athletic department leadership. And that's what you want to avoid. That's where I think a real challenge could come in. Twofold. One, whether you are, lobbying to try to get the conference to be more aggressive, to be more proactive, to try and go out and get teams, to add teams, or this or that, or if you're trying to represent Pitt's interests in considering a different league, if somehow it would come to that. You'd like to not be in a period of transition. And so that to me, and honestly, that to me is the thing that concerns me the most right now about the Ohio State situation. I believe Pitt is an attractive enough situation that if they, I believe Pitt is an attractive enough destination that if they lose, if Ohio State were to hire Heather Lyke, I believe they could find a very good athletic director to take the job. Despite the questions about the ACC and its future, I believe they could find a very good athletic director to come in and take the job and move forward. I think they're very capable of that. I think there's enough, this university and this athletic department have enough going for them. They could find someone really good. I'm not as concerned about that as I am about what it would mean in the short term of being in this transition period where the conference is trying to find its footing. You need to make sure that Pitt's interests are best represented. And while it's not that I think Joan Gable and possibly a new athletic director, if it came to that, it's not that I think they would be incapable of best representing Pitt's interests. It's just tough when you're the new guy. It's tough when you're the new face at the table. So those are some of the challenges. That's what concerns me the most about Ohio State, and the interest that they're going to show in Heather Lyke. And again, I believe it'll happen. I believe a vetting will happen. I believe a search firm or someone affiliated with Ohio State will reach out to Heather Lyke to gauge her interests. I imagine that if someone reaches out and gauges her interest, she will say, yes, I am interested. Because why wouldn't she? We'll see where it goes. from there. But we'll probably see reports. So, they contacted Heather Lyke. Heather Lyke, this or that. She's going to be on that list, whether it's a short list or a long list. And I imagine to start, at least, it's a very long list, and she'll be on that very long list. I wouldn't be surprised if she makes a cut to a shorter list. So you'll see that come out. And, none of it will necessarily mean that she's getting the job and she's leaving Pitt, but it is going to be something to watch and monitor over the next, who knows how many months. Think things will move a little bit quicker once Ohio State hires a president, but we'll see. We'll see when that happens and what happens when it happens. All right, make sure you check out Panther-Lair.com. People are on the message boards talking about all of this, the Heather Lyke and Ohio State situations, the ACC, realignment, expansion, all of those topics, in addition to, this little thing called Pitt football, which is going on in the South Side. I'll be down there this morning for another training camp practice. We'll have pre-practice interview with Pat Narduzzi. We'll have that video and transcript posted live. We'll have post-practice interviews. We'll have practice highlights. All kinds of stuff, slideshows, everything that you would need and want to see from training camp. We will have it right there at Panther-Lair.com, so make sure you stay tuned. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards, like I said, to talk with other Pitt fans. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope it's been a great week for you so far. We'll catch you tomorrow on the Friday episode of The Morning Pitt right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.